Hi there, hello, welcome to our virtual away day. I hope you've had a good time so far. Good afternoon. Today, Sarah, myself and Jessica here, we're going to have a conversation really, a discussion about the EHCP, the process, the touch points for us as an organisation where PBSC kind of interacts with the EHCP process. And we're going to also try and weave through that some of the experience of the family members that we work with too. So my name is Sarah Wakeling. I'm a board certified behaviour analyst and clinical psychologist, and I'm the director of Positive Behaviour Support Consultancy. This is my colleague Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Aviles. I am a board certified behaviour analyst as well, and I am the clinical lead here at PBS Consultancy.
Lovely.
So we're going to start a bit today going through what PBSC is and isn't. What we aren't is an education organization. We work sometimes in educational settings, but we are primarily a community-based organization. We don't solely work in schools. We sometimes work in schools where the need is there, but really it is about focusing on the child or young person with behaviors that are barriers to a good quality of life, which more often than not includes educational attainment. So we will come into schools if necessary. We do primarily work with young people in their homes. Sometimes we work with them to avoid inpatient units, as well as to help them transition from inpatient units back into the community so that they may not even be accessing school just yet.
Yeah.
So we are really that tier 4 service for our clients. We do not focus on academic targets, although having an understanding of beyond autism and the types of targets that you integrate in your education setting, we do focus on a lot of similar targets. And we are not Ofsted regulated, and we're not educational psychologists. We are behavior analysts or working towards becoming behavior analysts and RBTs. Our demographic is special education needs, so individuals with learning disabilities. Some have autism, some just have autism with no learning disabilities, but we do provide that support across health, education, and social sector.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today I'm going to talk a bit about what our intentions are for the day. So we are going to go into describing our experience of working within the EHC framework and the assessment of educational healthcare needs for individuals. We're going to talk a bit about our what we do as professionals at PBSC and how we integrate ourselves, how we become embedded in the whole of the process across all elements of the plan. We're going to talk a bit about the voices of the children and young people and the families we work with and the importance of integrating that in the process. This will be done through sort of looking at the background of the EHC plan, the more legalities around it, the known challenges and challenges we've come across, and how we've been able to mitigate those risks and sort of through our 5-stage process.
Lovely. Thanks, Jessica. So a little bit about the previous policy. It's not something we're going to go into a huge amount, so don't worry. But just to set the context really, so prior to EHCPs, the policy context was really one of holistic understanding of children's needs. So there was a recognition that children aren't just health, aren't just social, aren't just education, but they're a broad range and cross all of those disciplines, these kind of artificial walls that we build up, or these silo working that we do. So there's a recognition that multidisciplinary working or multi-professional working is inherent in the work with children. The policy framework was also from a kind of social assessment of disability, a social model. So recognising that we were interested in people's skills and abilities and not just thinking about disabilities. And you saw legislation like the Disability Discrimination Act or the Equality Act kind of bearing that out. So prior to the EHCP, which we're talking about today, the policy framework was somewhat similar. I think what we found though, there was an inquiry in 2009 that really kind of looked to see whether that framework, that spirit, played out in practice for children with special educational needs and their families. And I think it's fair to say that no, it didn't particularly. So the real experiences of people and their families was inconsistencies in the support or the quality of the provision that people received. And those of you who've been in this sector a long time and or worked across various local authorities or in different parts of the country probably can articulate this yourselves. They found that there was low aspirations for people with learning disabilities, people with SEND needs, and the whole framework was just fractured and complex and made navigation really quite challenging for parents, professionals, and obviously for the young people. So this inquiry made a series of recommendations. Firstly, the enhancement of working with parents, so recognition that parents know quite a lot about their children, I think was really key, and elevating their role to be on the same level, if you like, with professionals, so partnership working with parents. Improvement to information, so something called the local offer came through. I'm sure those of you are aware of that. The kind of borough has to advertise what's available locally so people have an understanding of services available. There was support recommended to be able to support people to have choice and participation. So understanding that it's not always easy for the client group we're talking about, and extra support might be needed. And then, as we said about those kind of low aspirations, to raise those, to lift our expectations of the young people we support, but not just in that educational domain, not just narrowly on attendance or attainment, but actually broadly thinking about their social outcomes or their participation or independence as well. So that fed really into the Children and Families Act 2014, a really obviously significant act for those of us working in this field, to aim to bring about these positive outcomes in quite broad areas. It led to the development of the EHCP, Education, Health and Care Plans, to replace the kind of statementing, the old statementing process that we had before. The spirit was to give more presence and power to children and their families, to lift those aspirations and expectations, and to really help people achieve, or to kind of facilitate people to have the fullest, the most participative and independent life that was fully possible and open to them. So the way I think about that really is kind of thinking about a joined up approach where different professionals are working together, very personalised way of working, and kind of producing these policies in light of working closely with the children and their families, really being at the heart of the process. So it led to the EHCP, parents and children having more power, increased choice and participation, a joined up approach, a personalised approach, and then the better outcomes. So that was the goal really of the Children and Families Act and the EHCP process that came from it. Did it happen? There's an interesting study, 2017, by the University of University of Derby, and they looked at parents and children's views of the process, of the experience of going through this process, and they came out with some quite interesting findings, I think. So firstly, they looked at joined up working, and what's quite useful, I think, is that 82% of people thought that there was some extent of joined up working at least all of the time. So they felt that the professionals they worked with were knowledgeable about the process, which is great. And about 3/4 actually thought that they had worked together successfully. So this idea of being joined up, having different disciplines working together in a cohesive way seemed to kind of ring true in this survey.
In terms of the personalization, this is where we started to see the percentages decrease. So when the study looked at what was offered in terms of communication support for the young person and the families, only 41% were offered an advocate, and the percentages were even lower, lower than 21% for offering of communication aids and visual aids. Which is really interesting, considering more often than not, educational health care plans are written for individuals who require require some sort of augmented communication support to be able to access life, let alone a process that helps to dictate how their life is shaped and the people and provisions that support them in their lives. And we also found, the research article found the understanding of the EHCP. It was easy for parents. It's 74%. They found it quite easy to understand. But again, when you get to the child or young person and the accessibility of the EHC plan for those young people, you start to see the percentages decrease to about 36% of children and young people understanding what is the EHC plan for, and then 26% finding it easy, which is really interesting because I think one of the whole aims of an EHC plan and the act coming into play is making sure that this process is personalized and person-centered. So, I mean, from my own experience, having worked in an environment where person-centered planning was an absolute must for the preparation of the educational healthcare plan development, not just at the very beginning, not just when transitioning from statements to EHC plans, but throughout every year became a part of it. And that, I think, goes into the personalization of the process for our young people and the children.
I think if you dive into the detail of that study, it does show that as children get older, their experience of kind of understanding it grows, which makes sense. A younger child, I guess, would find this experience more unclear, kind of what's it for. But nevertheless, they're still quite low scores, really. And as you say, we know we're dealing with people with additional needs, so we need to ensure that we're doing this well.
Absolutely. With the third area being co-produced, we see that, again, parents' wishes, they scored quite high. 82% of parents' wishes were integrated in the EHC plan. And then you start to dip into the wishes being for the young children and young people being at about 55%. And some where parents and the young people were not considered were at 17%. And then the level of involvement also scored quite low, with about 44% asked if they wanted to take part, and then when given a choice, only 19% actually reported having given a choice on how to take part in the process.
And certainly that's my experience of being involved in this. I can think of very few clients who have been part of this process. And maybe that represents the clients that we work with, that they tend to be out of education, maybe refusing to go into schools. But it's certainly not common where I've seen the young person themselves producing this. It's not been common for me.
Absolutely, it's not been common for me either. I think oftentimes the co-production is relevant to the skill set of the individuals around that young person or that child, because it is about understanding how their wishes and opinions are expressed, being familiar with how they express preference, and being able to then integrate the ways in which they express preference to apply it to this process. So it does take a set of skills from the mediators, from the people around that child or young person, to be able to integrate it into the process.
Yes, I agree. I suppose the whole point of it, if you like, did it fulfill its aims? And actually 3/4 of people felt that the EHCP helped get the child the support that they needed. So I think that's a relatively useful outcome, and in particular in the areas of education. You can see 67% found the education experience was improved, and actually moving into health and well-being was also quite good. What's interesting to me in thinking about the work we do in positive behaviour support consultancy is when we're starting to think more broadly, and remember the goals of the policies that we've talked about is a more broader understanding and application of kind of goals for life, if you like. That's where we saw those percentages slipping, that actually we don't do quite as well when we're thinking about participation in the community, independent living skills, skills for adulthood, and actually just even thinking about future planning or aspirations for the future. I think that's the area that seems to be weaker. Certainly the survey data indicated that, and my experience also kind of reflects that.
Absolutely. I mean, having worked in school and community settings, it's certainly, you do see that discrepancy. And I wonder if it's by the nature of the EHC plan. So when you think about where the meetings are being held, well, pre-COVID, they're held they're held at school. You know, having been facilitated by obviously the EHC coordinator, but really the EHC coordinator is often the person that knows the young person the least and relies quite heavily on the parents as well as the school staff as being the real experts of the young person. And so when you look at why there's improvements in education or health and well-being, it is no wonder that those score quite high. And I know, me being a parent, I think I want to make sure that my child is healthy and well and is happy. So I'd be thinking about those things rather than participation in the community, or independent living skills that are going to be helpful.
Feel way off.
Yeah, they do feel really far away. So I can imagine that is also an influence on the focus.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the way we would think about it that's slightly differently is they may be way off, but actually they may take some time to build as well. So you might want to start those building blocks early, leading to that long term.
Absolutely. I mean, it is about breaking down those big targets of being able to work, have a job. What does that actually look like for that young person, and breaking it down to smaller steps.
So this diagram reflects really what we found in that survey. So the focus on education, progress and attainment in the centre, and then those broader skills around the outside. And that outside light blue circle is where you will find myself with our staff team floating around. PBSC will be around there somewhere, thinking about community presence and participation, thinking about some of the prerequisite skills to learning. So how do you even access a school? How do you transition from school to college? How do you get in a taxi? Some of those skills actually that are very important, engagement, attention, we may be dealing with, and then taking it all the way up to aspirations for the future, going to work, living on your own, moving out of home, those type of things too. So in reality for us, it still feels quite an education focused document. Sometimes we're involved, sometimes we're not. But if we are, we tend to be at this outer level. Is that true for you?
I mean, I think having worked in special schools, certainly many of the targets in the blue are targets you see happening in special school settings because of the not being able to access the regular curriculum or the main, your general education curriculum. But it is definitely different because I think we have the flexibility and luxury really to be able to work outside of school hours. And in focus in different settings, and be able to focus on going to a restaurant with a family, or being able to just go get ice cream with someone. Those are things that you don't really get a whole lot of opportunities to do when you have to focus on academic achievement as well. I've seen it in both settings, certainly.
That makes sense. So to give you an illustration of how PBSC, if you like, kind of interacts sometimes with this process, this case was before your time, Jessica. But it was a young person with severe learning disabilities and autism, attended the local special school in the borough, provided council transport there and back, had a sibling with learning disabilities and actually quite complex, challenging behaviour who'd recently stopped attending school. The family had English as a second language, and it was quite a deprived family with a lack of resources. So the presenting problem, if you like, was that the young person wouldn't always make it to transport. So that small window of getting on council transport was a little narrow for this young person, and they frequently missed the council transport, which meant mum or dad had to take them in their car. At the other end, when they arrived at school, this young person sometimes wouldn't get out of transport or the car. And actually, if did get out, didn't get much further than the reception, the lobby area of the school, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is a very kind of hustle and bustly type of place. and resulted in quite a big impact on other students. So this young person would vocalise, maybe reach out, hit out at individuals as they walk past. The family couldn't consistently get the young person to school, so often resulted in poor attendance. And there was some strange kind of challenges around the boundaries around different people's roles. So the escort staff on the bus not being able to cross certain thresholds, and the school staff not being able to cross certain thresholds.
Right.
So just made that transition all the more difficult. So not only are you moving places and boundaries, but you're also switching staff as well. There was an EHCP plan in place. The targets focused on the improving attendance, which obviously was an issue, but there wasn't really much detail in how that was going to happen.
Right.
Not much support for the family home. They were given a personal budget to employ carers to potentially help with those morning routines. And then parents, really, it was their responsibility to get the young person onto the transport.
Right.
The outcome really was that, unfortunately, the family weren't able to recruit or train any carers, so there was never a carer in place. The money just kind of sat in the bank. Dad had to frequently come to school to pick up the young person if they weren't able to access the school, which resulted in him missing work, which was really significant for this family. The child eventually was excluded after very poor attendance. Tutors were put in the family home with little success, and finally the young person didn't return to school. So we had a bit of a brainstorm to think about what could have been different in this process, what the EHC plan could have done differently. There was a functional behavioural assessment that wasn't incorporated into the EHC plan, which I think is a mistake. Access to attention was the function, and as you can imagine, in that lobby and reception, there was lots of opportunities for high fives, sometimes tickles, sometimes bundling on of other students. It was quite a high, exciting place to be. I think there could have been some work there. There was very little focus on teaching independent transitioning skills, which I really saw as a prerequisite for learning for this young person. That really could have been a focus of the plan. The sibling needed support, and this is where the HCP has to go broader than that individual child. It needs to look at that family as a unit or as a system, thinking a bit about systemic working. The impact of the other sibling at home really was the main kind of contributing factor that broke down the other sibling's ability to go to school.
I imagine it has impact on sort of the expectations of routine and that all being shifted.
Oh, completely. It all kind of fell away.
Yeah.
The care agency really needed to be managed by the council. There was never an expectation in my mind that the family would be able to identify, recruit and train staff to come into their family home, and they actually weren't able to do that. We undertook some health investigations and found nocturnal seizures. So this person then had a diagnosis of epilepsy, and they were seen as contributing to his subsequent mood and abilities the next day. So it became very important in understanding his presentation and how quick or slow he was at moving between settings.
I can imagine.
We tried the idea of a use of another entrance in the school, which proved effective for some of the period, but actually was quite difficult for the school to maintain. It's not where all the other students went in. And then the idea of the staff, as I said, they couldn't kind of cross those thresholds, became a barrier. And finally, he needed a bespoke taxi and escort service, and that sounds easy, but actually is very hard to achieve in practice.
Right.
And then finally, as you said, the routines fell apart and we needed restoration of routines. And that was more than just telling mum and dad. It actually needed hands-on, going back into the family home from very early in the morning, also late at night, to rebuilding those routines. So that's a piece of work we did actually do.
Great.
But it shows, I hope, the illustration was to show the kind of significant impact on families in terms of if the education provision breaks down. So if for some reason we're not able to proactively manage maybe low-level behaviours and they get bigger and bigger, resulting in exclusions from school or time away from school, and then the pressure it puts on a family home, often destabilising the family home. We know from experience most of the students we work with are already out of school, and their mental well-being has suffered. The families are under intense pressure. Maybe people aren't working that worked previously, they've got other siblings in the home, and ultimately that's where we're looking at admission to hospital or our residential schools, and obviously high cost placements, and kind of thinking about how we support the EHCP process to really navigate some of those challenges for our client group as well. So that's where we pick up our clients. So part of this learning, the EHCP learning for us, is ensuring that our process meets those needs, ensuring that we do have really good joined up approaches, ensuring it's personalised, ensuring we help people be equal partners in the production of their plans, agency in their own lives. And we do this through our 5-stage process: matching, checking that we're the right service for the individual, understanding the ecology or the context of that referral. We have a whole stage on engaging. So how do we build a rapport with the young person, but also that network, the joined up working we're talking about. Understanding is where we're doing the scientific understanding of behaviour, our functional behavioural assessment. Our delivering phase is one when we're putting an intervention in place, where we're doing a shaping programme, for example. And then we have a whole stage, again, I think quite unique, to celebrate achievements and to ensure that we have those high expectations.
So to bring back the 3 areas from the previous study, if we look at the first area of joined up, this is where our stage 1 matching and our stage 2 engaging starts to sort of come alive. So this is where we are starting to understand the ways and the context of the multidisciplinary team, understanding who is at that table, what is their responsibilities, how do they work together, and how are they not working together, really. So understanding those maybe even socio-political contexts that exist with the people at the table. We often plan for the groups and networks to work. So there is never an assumption that they automatically work. Rather, we plan for it to work. In terms of how this looks practically, we, in our engaging stage, we sit down and have a meeting with everyone, and we go through expectations that they should have from us and that we have from them through every single stage of our 5-stage process. And this is a really great practice in that it allows us to be very transparent in terms of expectations, in terms of outcomes. It helps us to start to build rapport and start to understand the ways in which the network around that young child or young person likes to receive information, doesn't like to receive information, likes to be communicated with. And we often use that as an opportunity to say, if things don't work, what do we do? So this isn't just for when social care isn't working in terms of the multidisciplinary ways of working. How do we escalate? It's about everyone being able to identify and know the escalation procedures to ensure that everyone is meeting those outcomes and doing what they say they're going to do when they become a part of the network for the young person.
I think this stage is really important. Actually, it fits with the whole ethos of having high expectations. It's not fair for us to have high expectations of our learners and our students if we don't have them of ourselves. And this initial phase of matching and engaging is where we as an organisation kind of enlist other people to come on this journey with us, that shared focus, that shared goal, recognising what we have in common, which is usually the best interests of the client and wanting to see a good outcome. So we really do have quite unique focus pieces of work here, and think they're vital to going forward. They eradicate some of the misunderstandings along the way, and they always also give you that opportunity to go back if there is some conflict
Absolutely.
to resolve it quickly.
I think it also really does help for us to know who the level of expertise and how we can work collectively to meet those needs for the young person. So I'm presuming with the case previous, when you made reference to understanding the nighttime epilepsy, it wasn't us doing the assessment. Yes. It was knowing that the psychiatrist and the CAMS team needing to be involved to get that assessment done. And it is about understanding that all of us have something of importance and expertise to bring to this young person. We as PBSC are not here to come and fix everything. We are here to help everyone fix and support that young person.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any professional has all the answers.
No.
But we're definitely more effective working together, and the joined up bit, I think, is the part that we have to really work on to ensure that we can offer a good quality of service to the clients and the families as well.
Absolutely.
There was an illustration, wasn't there, coming up for you to
So even if you would just reflect on the network, it's no wonder people work in sort of different ways, because we have the young person in that diagram of like the young person being in the middle, and then you've got the network, and it looks so simple and it's 3 little circles. It actually isn't, because you've got the child and young person, then you've got the family and the carers, and you probably have Nan, and you probably have an uncle or an aunt that's really hands-on and supportive to the family. You have siblings, you have education staff, so your teachers, your LSA, quite likely if they're in crisis, senior leadership team is going to be involved. You've got social care, you've got CAMS. CAMS, again, may not necessarily be just one person. I know for a case we have a CAMS nurse specialist, we have a psychiatrist, we have a clinical psychologist. So in many respects, just in that team alone brings about 3 different people. You have commissioners, you often have housing involved, you have transport, as you mentioned, transport managers.
We got to know transport quite well.
Exactly. And then you have us, PBSC, which often has more than one person involved in the case to ensure that we are all working together. So it is absolutely no wonder that it's so difficult for everyone to be on the same page and working. We all have the same intention and the same goals, but the ways, and it kind of stops there almost.
Yeah, it has to be more than intention. It has to have some practical strategies and tools to make it work. Absolutely. And I think that's what we've tried to embed in our process, the practicalities of how do you be joined up? Not just we want to be, we believe in it. How do you do it? That's something we do. So the second element was personalised. How do we ensure our support is personalised? Well, I would like to think as behaviour analysts, this is the kind of bread and butter of what we do, ensuring that we do personalised assessment and also going into the intervention as well. So we take quite significant time to understand the unique, and it is unique, situation of that child and their family, their context, their ecology. We talk about mediators being really significant, how the people who support that young person play a part in the young person's personality, behaviours. And I think we take quite a long time to do this. We're very comprehensive. So we do a 5-day function is basically what we call it, which is our functional behavioural assessment. Takes on average 5 days, and that's observing, interviewing, discussing, doing lots of different ways of trying to involve the young person in that assessment process. So quite a detailed, personalised way of getting to know a person. And I think you mentioned COVID earlier. Getting to know the virtual means of doing this as well has certainly been interesting. We've got a range of tools to do this to support effective data gathering. Data collection is very rarely as you imagine it would be. It's usually some sort of creative spin on the usual kind of data collection form, to have to be very innovative and kind of think outside of the box. And we have a full understanding of best interest, capacity, consent, all of those really key issues actually when we're talking about certainly older children moving to adulthood, but really starting to think about whose wishes we're talking about, who we're assessing, especially if there's differences in opinion between the parents and the young person.
Yeah, I really enjoy this stage to have the time to do all of the unpicking of the young person and his or her, their mediators. I mean, thinking back on the example that you gave earlier, to get a personal budget
Mm-hmm.
to then identify carers and hire people. It is through our this stage actually
Yes.
that we were able to identify this family has no capacity and it should be somebody else's responsibility.
Yes.
Or it needs to be someone else's responsibility to ensure that carers could be hired.
Yes.
That a personal budget in it of itself is a wonderful resource to have when you have it, but if you don't have a capacity to do anything with it, then it just sits there
Yes.
and nothing, and the support that it's intended to give doesn't actually happen. And it's through the personalization that comes from our understanding stage that you're able to identify that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably quite unique, the mediator analysis
Mhm.
section, where we
Yes.
are thinking about the skills, the resources, the competencies, the philosophies, the value base of usually the parents, but the stakeholders, the key people that are going to be part of that child's journey. And we do that very openly and transparently, but it's written down, it's discussed. So is a parent going to be able to manage a personal budget? In this case, no. And it was a mistake to give it, actually. It wasted precious time.
Mm.
Okay, the final stage, the co-production, less about stage, I suppose, the co-production value of the EHCP is something that we also hold quite highly. It primarily comes through in our delivering stage where we're implementing interventions. And I think those words aren't quite right. We don't implement an intervention into someone else. It's about a process of coming together to design a kind of variety of skills treatments, of skills teaching, building capacity in individuals and families, resilience, coping, to take things forward together as a team. And I think it's really grounded on the goal setting.
Absolutely, absolutely. As Sarah mentioned earlier, we don't have loads of time. And so we don't have several targets. We typically focus on about 3. And often, of course, they're going to be related to the nature of the referral. But more often, we will integrate targets around coping and resilience, or teaching a young person to identify setting events and triggers so that they then can engage in coping and tolerating strategies to self-monitor. I think that is a major focus of the type of work we do, because we know our time is limited and we know it's not long-lasting behavior change if it only works when we are there in those very few weeks that we're there. And we often are in this stage. I think one of the beauties I love about seeing this stage is that when you look at a behavior support plan, it's written in first person. Where it is possible, this young person is actually writing it with us. So there is that co-production in the behavior support plans that we're developing, in identifying those 3 targets. And when it's not possible, then it is integrating the family and yeah.
I was just thinking about that goal setting stage. It is really important, and it's very rare we'd have a goal such as to go back to school, although that might be an intention. It would be so much more, it would have more depth and more weight than that. So as Jessica said, yes, we could take someone to school and we could leave them there and the next day they'll never go back. So it is about building that resilience. So when things don't go well at school, potentially that was the reason they stopped attending. What are they going to do next time?
Absolutely.
I think that would be where it kind of interfaces, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Lovely, thank you.
So the final stage of our 5-stage process is our celebrating stage. This is the best stage, I think, because this is where we get an opportunity to really praise and celebrate the young person or child's achievements throughout the work they've done with us, I should say, or that we've been able to do with them and their mediators. And it is really about identifying a space where they are ready. They are ready to move on from the work that we're doing, and it is about activating the members of their support network to continue their commitment towards making this progress not only sustainable, but moving beyond it. It's not just enough for the young person to be back in school. It's then now being able to go to college or be able to find a vocation that is suitable for them. So this is where we are in our celebrating stage, really coming back together with the network to talk about the journey of this young person, from the first stage to the final stage, and really then saying, okay, network, okay, parents, okay, young person, here you are, here's what you've done. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go on, be free.
But I think that's really important, and it is weaving this framework of the plan into this. So the plan is an ongoing kind of live reflection of where that young person is at. So there's that direction of travel, there's that trajectory that's maybe changed course slightly, we hope, from the work that we've done,
right,
and can kind of take someone off in a different direction. And that's where the kind of monitoring is really needed. Absolutely. Of the plan, and the values of being joined up, of being personalised. We hope at that point the network reflects on their role in it and thinks that that's the way they'll work again next time, because that's what gets you the outcomes. That's Absolutely. Why they're there. We know evidence suggests that.
This is also a stage, I guess, internally for us, is where we are reflecting on how things went. So when we have done the celebrating meeting and we've closed up shop, we then internally are sitting and reflecting with the team around what worked well, what didn't work well. It is often through these reflective practices that have then shaped things like changes to the other parts of the stages, to make sure that we are addressing or trying to proactively address the barriers that come up with working with such complex networks.
And working in silos.
Absolutely. I think some of our best ideas have come from those reflective practice sessions that we've had, to then really try to get everyone on board from the very beginning in ways of working.
Yes. So we've left this slide in for if we had another opportunity to sit down together and have this conversation. So we're not going to go into detail, but it's just some of the other issues that popped up when we were planning this conversation, this discussion between us, things that we've come across in our work in terms of our relation to this framework. So as we've said, many children we support are actually already out of school. And there's definitely an impact there, certainly in terms of attendance at meetings. Very rarely our children go to the meetings we've been talking about today. We really want those behaviours of concern to be kind of front and centre in that plan. And we know there's the sections, but it's not always in there. We'd really like to see the functional behavioural assessment seen as an integrative part of that planning process, so the needs can be fully understood and the provision put in place. We've noticed that many of our clients with autism don't have an EHCP in place, even though they've got very complex behaviours and significant barriers to learning, so significant special educational needs.
Yes, absolutely.
As far as we can see, it's probably a whole other discussion, but something we certainly come across on a daily basis. And then just some of the process challenges. Every local authority has a different format, some are better than others. The ability of articulating the how to achieve the outcomes seems to be very variable across plans, and the lack of smart targets is something we see frequently in our work and something we try and contribute to as behaviour analysts as well. Do you want to say anything on that?
No.
Final other point?
No, I think you're good.
So to conclude, we clearly see a benefit of this process, and we think the parents and young people do too. It's great to have a framework that holds the journey of the young person essentially through education. Makes sense. This is where they spend a lot of their time, but we'd like to see some of those other strings, other aspects of their life coming in more centre stage. Would like to support with that, absolutely, as other disciplines need to be brought in too. The relevance of the home context, I think, is really important. The as you said, the kind of unique privilege we have in our organisation is that we can cross into homes. We can be in the family home with people. Often work is needed there to support the education in school. It's not always clear how those things come together, but it's usually relevant, and we have that privileged position to do it, and it would be great to see that thread coming through the plans more. We'd like to see the preventative and proactive working. As a positive behaviour support practitioner, that's really important, and I think it's just as important in this process. The focus on how to achieve targets, being specific, the monitoring the plan I've mentioned, but the spirit of collaborative working and preventing that silo working where we all forget that we're in it together for the same goals is really the key of the work we're doing. And certainly at PBSC we work hard to generate that activated network where we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. Anything you want to add?
That was beautiful, Sarah. Well done.
Right. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Just a comment I think we'll kick off with from Deborah Brennan around IQ levels not being mentioned, which I think is obviously key. Do you guys want to comment on that at all?
Only that, yeah, it doesn't really matter to us in terms of IQ, but certainly there was another question about higher functioning ASD, and yes, we do see a gap in vision there in terms of the HCP, and we were just discussing earlier why we think that is, and certainly one of the areas that we see as quite important is often the clients with ASD that get referred to us are actually costing very little money to the system, if you like. So typically they're the type of guys that are refusing school, maybe gaming in their rooms, personal care dropping off, but they're not causing damage, they're not engaging in criminal behaviour. So actually there's very little cost, and as soon as we pick up a case like that, cost begins, if you like. That wallet starts kind of ratcheting up the money. So I think it's obviously something to do with money. We tried quite hard in this presentation not to focus on the negatives and not just to focus on cost. I know there's a lot of articles in the media at the moment about the costs of education for special educational needs and it not matching the need out there. We tried to keep away from that, but obviously that's a big elephant in the room that I think we're all very aware of.
And I think people need to realise that your client group, your service users, if you will, are not the typical children or adults that most practitioners interact with. I mean, you guys are working with dynamic risk register people in hospitalisation, at risk of that, or just coming out and trying to reintegrate back into society, as it were. So, of course, yes, to a certain extent, it feels like from our conversations in the past that people are nowadays tending to approach you for your service. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you think of that kind of triangle of levels of support with the universal and the targeted and the more specific support at the top, we do typically find ourselves at that top level, which I think Maggie talked about in terms of who accesses behaviour analytic services in the UK. They get them because they're in absolute crisis and they need some sort of support. Unfortunately, we don't get them earlier. We get them at that crisis point. That's when people put money into these cases. Unfortunately, not before. So yeah, very much that kind of top level crisis.
And that seems like a pretty clear message, doesn't it? I mean, to a certain extent, Maggie was talking about very small children, but a large group of your clients will be your 15, 16-year-olds and above, and this is what happens type scenario if you don't get
about those small-bodied children turning into big kind of pubescent adults who then do cause damage. So absolutely, they then get funding because of the impact of their behaviour. Their behaviour may have been the same all the way through, but the impact changes quite significantly. One of the questions that came, Andy, was about costing, kind of the cost to the system, how we do that. I was just going to say just briefly without going into huge details, but I think because we're an independent sector organisation, it's always been very important to us to be able to articulate where the money goes. It's kind of a very obvious exchange of funds when our service is purchased. So we have a model that looks at the cost of our service on a daily basis. How many days support does an individual receive against, and we have a probability scale of likelihood of admission to hospital or admission to residential services. For some people, that's never a possibility, so they wouldn't have that cost averted. But for some of our clients, they're very far along that pathway. So maybe there's already talk about looking for a bed for an individual, or parents are already looking around residential schools, that they've been to panel, those kind of things. So we then compare the two costs, and we do a 3-month admission as a kind of average for hospital, and we do a 12-month residential placement cost, and we compare the two. And we look at, if we've averted that for that young person, the savings there. And it's just a way to try and articulate that kind of lifespan of saved costs, which is quite difficult. But we know, as Maggie said, those children that she's talking about will be our adults of the future. So to try to show the system the long-term impact of these individuals, and it doesn't fit very easily in the kind of models that we have currently, but it's something that we try and articulate to our commissioners and kind of directors of services.
Just to clear that up slightly, that question earlier in the day, Sarah Walker had mentioned that she tracked that, and I think that might have been a little bit more aimed at sort of children's and ABA, more classic ABA services, but actually totally relevant to what you do as well. So we'll make sure to link up Mike and Sarah later. But thank you for talking to that. That's really, really interesting. I had a couple of questions if you guys are happy to host them. The first one could be for both of you, but maybe for Sarah to begin with. Jess, I've got one for you as well. Don't worry. So, Sarah, you and I have talked about the 5-stage model many times in PBSC, and how I just find it really inspirational in terms of how it just maps onto all of the expectations we have since 2014 in the Education and Healthcare Plan and the Children and Families Act. So I just wondered, obviously you established PBSC in 2007, so that was 7 years before 2014. Maths win. When was it you realised that the science of behaviour analysis and positive behaviour support in terms of its model, perhaps you took inspiration from the Lavinia model, I'm not sure. When did you find or think or start to build this idea that it could be converted into an operational model?
I think there's some history. So I worked for Lavinia for a while in the States. So again, thinking about Maggie talking about those kind of cross-cultural comparisons. So was kind of in part doing behaviour analysis in the States. And then when I brought it back to the UK, it really wasn't something that people had heard of or bought into. So I knew the package had to be right to deliver it in a way that people understood. So right from back then, that we were delivering it in a model, if you like, that was more understandable to a UK market. As my company then grew and new behaviour analysts were coming to work with us, I was seeing them struggle getting their plans off the ground, which, as I know lots of behaviour analysts do struggle with this. They have great plans, but they can't get people to do them. They can't get them the fidelity right. So the rationale of creating a model was to help them focus in at the points that we know help with fidelity. So whether that's the mediator analysis, understanding the needs of the people that are going to carry out the plan, or whether it's the ecological analysis, understanding those systems and kind of relations in a family unit or a school unit, I knew they were really important, and I wanted to give a way of systemizing that to the staff to be able to replicate it across many different people, and not to be based on luck. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Not to be based on luck of the experience of the practitioner, but to be based on sound understanding of what we know in the field actually gets this stuff to stick. So that's where it came from. So at least the last 4 or 5 years, we've been using the model as a way to get those things across. And I think you talk quite a lot about this model is then understandable to our purchasers or our clients, because it's not behaviour analytics speak.
Right, exactly. It's operationally defined in a way that is easily understood by people who are not in the ABA or PBS world. And I think by doing that in that way, it's a package of support that people can really get on board with.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And do you find that in terms of that, a big sort of selling point, silly word, inspirational point, I guess, or even lifeblood of the service really is your activating of the networks? And do you find does the process then activate the network as well? So obviously I hear what you're saying around operationalizing what we may do in terms of processes of trained behaviour analysts, but do you then find the model enables the activation?
Yeah, because I just think it's clear what the expectations are on everybody. And going back to the presentation, those high expectations were a real problem area for people with learning disabilities and autism. And I never want that to be acceptable. So I want to kind of state from the outset, whoever we work with, that we have high expectations of our clients, but of ourselves as practitioners and the network. So I think the model helps everybody get on board with that. Everybody then understands what their kind of role is. And I think it just irons out some of those challenges that we can so easily face when we're working in a multidisciplinary way, when we're working in systems that have no money, when we're working with practitioners that are on sick leave, all of the things that we all face. We're not in a well-funded area, as we all know. So it's often challenging. And I think setting it out in this way helps everyone understand it. It also clarifies some of those myths that people have about what we're going to do as behavioural analysts, and reassures people that, it is non-aversive, that we understand restrictive practice, and that's not where we're going. And some of those concerns that people maybe have and state or don't state, we can address head on, I think, with the model. And so we don't tend to then come across those issues later on.
Mm-hmm. Just quickly, Jess, because unfortunately we're running out of time. And as we all know in this little group here, we can talk about this for a very long time. But to a certain extent, you've touched on this already, so thank you. But it was just given your experience across your sectors, like coming from the States into working in schools, the NHS, and now PBSC. Like, is there anything you want to add about the 5-stage model that you think works particularly, given that you've worked across many different models?
Yeah, I think this model, the beauty, what I was so attracted by this model was that it really takes the 10 key components of PBS and the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis, and it puts it in something that translates well to people who aren't in the field, but equally it holds and guides and maintains the procedural integrity of the process of what we do as behavior analysts. So I think I talk a lot about this in supervision, where it's like, okay, we have to learn the technology and the science behind it, but we have to make it real life for users who are not in our field. And I think that's the beauty of the model, is it does both really well, and they're integrated. You can't have one without the other.
Okay, great. I mean, there was one more question that's coming from Chloe, which I don't think we're going to have a chance to answer. So perhaps, Sarah, you could have a look, or is it you and Jess, maybe, and answer it in the chat, if you don't mind. That'd be awesome. Guys, thank you so much. I love your style of presentation, so thank you for thinking of
Thank you.
Yeah, as I say, I can recommend everybody try and get in touch with Sarah and Jess. Their contact details from the website, that run a fascinating, really sort of in-depth, far-reaching service. So thanks again, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.